Hi everybody, welcome to Shivers. For today's podcast episode, we're going to talk about some of my favorite episodes of the Twilight Zone, as well as a little bit of the history of the Twilight Zone itself. Last night I did a presentation on the analysis of the Twilight Zone, so this is basically fresh off of that. So to get into some of the actual episodes of the Twilight Zone, there have been a number of iterations of the TV show itself, so for this example, we're only going to focus on the original series from Rod Serling. So one of the most famous episodes that's ever been created is called Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. Jordan Peele created another Twilight Zone not that long ago. Only ran on Paramount Plus and CBS for 1 year for 2 seasons. But Jordan Peele took Nightmare at 20,000 Feet and turned it into Nightmare at 30,000 Feet. So Nightmare at 20,000 Feet was the original. This is from season 5, episode 3. This does have more of a horror inclination than really most of the other Twilight Zone episodes do, but you also have the support and the assistance from Richard Matheson. So Richard Matheson is a horror writer. So being able to pull him in on an episode for the Twilight Zone, of course, you're going to come up with something great. So they also pulled from a story called Fremlin from the Brothers Grimm. And the Grimm brothers, I have been incredibly vocal about. Like, talk about living or dead people I would want at a table at dinner. The Grimm brothers, that's seat number 1. Let me talk to them. But they created a whole lot of fables and stories way back in the day in Germany. And many of those stories from the Grimm brothers have been now turned into Disney princess stories in particular. So The Little Mermaid was a story about Ariel, about this girl who lived in the ocean who was a mermaid, but wanted everything to get on the sea, and it's all about this wish fulfillment. Do you really want to make this wish? Are you sure? And so for their version of The Little Mermaid, she makes that wish, but every single time that she walks, the bones hurt her body so bad because she's essentially learning how to walk, that the pain offsets anything else. So she is in eternal torture because she made this choice. That's scary. That's so much scarier than the actual Little Mermaid. But you have two camps, really, of people who say, well, Disney's doing a great thing by transmuting scary stories into something for kids. You have more of my camp, in my opinion, of from all the stories that they could have picked from, they pick horror stories. You know, we're not being influenced on horror for children. I'm not sure. But for the Brothers Grimm and for Richard Matheson and for Rod Serling to be part of this specific episode of the Twilight Zone, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, I could get on board with calling it the most horrifying, but it's a good episode. So next on the list is an episode called The Nick of Time. This is season 2, episode 7. This is the very infamous episode with the wish fulfillment machine. So still on that wish fulfillment side of things. I also have it tattooed here. You can't really see. But this machine in particular, I changed the head because the head is supposed to be the devil. I didn't necessarily love the idea of having a devil tattooed on me. But this wish fulfillment machine, this guy in the episode of Nick of Time, finds this machine and just continues to make wishes. So another lesson of wish fulfillment, but more specific to consequences. After that, we have an episode called The Masks, and we also have an episode called The Eye of the Beholder. So The Masks is from season 5, episode 25. Eye of the Beholder is season 2, episode 6. So Eye of the Beholder comes way before. Eye of the Beholder is one I would say that you would also know if you just Googled it. They all have like these pig masks. But The Masks is much more of a conversation on greed, on leadership, on this person who's in charge making all of these people wear masks. The Eye of the Beholder is much more of a conversation on beauty and standards and how do you look and how do you feel. When you look up the actual inspiration for the Eye of the Beholder, it doesn't really have much about beauty itself. So it's fascinating that that's what comes out of all of the studies for the show. But either way, both of them are conversations about greed and government and who are you listening to and where are you putting your faith. So they both deserve a spot. After The Eye of the Beholder, you do have The Hitchhiker. This is from season 1, episode 16, so very early on. I would put The Hitchhiker, and I'll go a little bit further down on the list, It's a Good Life. This is from season 3, episode 8, but both of them are really about trusting the wrong type of person and what other people are capable of and what are their actual intentions and what are their desires. You know, one of the things when you're looking at the analysis of the Twilight Zone as a whole, the entire thing is very much about this study and immersion into the unknown. The biggest fear for every single episode of the Twilight Zone is the idea of this twist ending, and we have no idea how it's going to end because we haven't been there. We haven't gone through it. So to be able to start looking at the Twilight Zone in these episodes, and this is really an immersion camp of horror and of the unknown, and what are we going to find out, and what are we going to learn about ourselves through this process too. That's what's really important. And who are we going to trust? Not only hopefully we have a distrust in government and society after watching the Twilight Zone, but hopefully we also have a little bit of discernment with the people who we're coming across on a regular basis too. So Hitchhiker and It's a Good Life really they capture that feeling. Next one on the list that I would say is probably, to me, the scariest episode of the Twilight Zone is 5 Characters in Search of an Exit. This is season 3, episode 14. You have a hobo, a clown, a bagpiper, an army major, and a ballet dancer. So all of these characters seem like they have nothing in common. I think it's kind of obvious from today's standard where this episode starts to go, like what the actual twist ending is. I think it's a little bit predictable, but you certainly have an air of claustrophobia in this episode and complete dread. I don't think that I've ever watched anything outside of like The Lodge where I have felt this level of dread before. So major kudos to the Twilight Zone. That one's gonna stick with me for a long time. 2 others that are a little bit more fun. You have Living Doll, season 5, episode 6, and The Dummy, season 3, episode 33, so 333. But The Dummy and Living Doll are both doll-based. The Dummy is that ventriloquist doll. The doll itself is, or the living doll is more of like a porcelain doll. Either way, they are the fears that people have of dolls and dolls taking over and kind of talking to you, taking control. And if you're afraid of Annabelle, get crazy with this. And then the last episode that I have on this OG list is an episode called The After Hours. So I'll go back to my tattoo of this lovely lady. She's from The After Hours. So this is season 1, episode 34. This is also the title of The Weeknd's album, The After Hours. And it is said that The Weeknd was inspired by the Twilight Zone. I went to Halloween Horror Nights in 2023, when The Weeknd had a haunted house at Halloween Horror Nights, and it was fantastic. I have talked about that haunted house over and over and over again, but the idea that The Weeknd has at least a semblance of true horror gives me so much hope for where all of that artistry can go. So I'm going to go on record. I'm going to go between 5 and 10 years from now, maybe even 15 years from now, where The Weeknd and more pop stars and more modern people are trying to get into horror, because I think that they get it, but from a Hollywood perspective. So I think that that opens a whole new door that we haven't really seen yet. But enough on that tangent. That's just my prediction. But The After Hours is so great. It's such a great episode of TV. It is, I don't want to give any spoilers whatsoever, because I'd go as far as saying this is my favorite TV show episode of all time, outside of Playtest, which I'll talk about in a second. But The After Hours is all focused on a mall and the different types of people who go to the mall and what are they there for and why are they there and what are they looking for. So you have this element of treasure hunt, which I do love as a trope, and mixing that in with the unknown of what is actually going on here, and a little bit of that community. You know, I am one of one, but I'm also one of many. So you hit a lot of different conversations in the After Hours episode. So the other episodes that I really wanted to bring up specifically from Black Mirror and the ties there, you do have mirrors. You have a lot of mirrors when it comes to Twilight Zone and Black Mirror. I would say Black Mirror is much more about like tech and the fears of automation and fears of the future. They both are about fears of the future, and both lean sci-fi, but Black Mirror is much more focused on like true tech and sci-fi rather than Twilight Zone. And not every single thing in Black Mirror has a lesson. Like most of the episodes do, but the ones where I don't really love them, and the reason why I wouldn't say like I love Black Mirror as a TV show, I still do, but it's because of that. Like I want more consequences. I want more rules. You know, what happens if you break these rules? What happens if this doesn't happen in the future? More lessons, more understanding. But Black Mirror's been on the air since 2011, which is 15 years. It makes you sick to your stomach. Makes me sick to my stomach. 15 years of Black Mirror is crazy. But when we're talking about like greed in particular, so I mentioned that with The Eye of the Beholder and The Masks, like those are very greed-based episodes of the Twilight Zone. You do have a very similar thing of greed, fear, vanity, even just human nature in general through episodes like The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which is another OG Twilight Zone episode. I don't really love that episode, which is why it's not on my like recommended list, but it is still all focusing on these neighbors who they have this flash of light in the neighborhood and they all think that it's because of an alien, and then they can't find the alien, so they believe that the alien is one of them. And so they all turn on each other. This goes directly back to The Hitchhiker and It's a Good Life of who are you trusting? And these people are not even trusting their own neighbors. So being a hypocrite of your own belief. But on top of that, then you do have aliens in this episode that are watching the entire thing happen from beyond the hill. So it's, do you only believe what you see? And if you only do that, look at what you're missing. But along with that same lesson of not turning on each other and, you know, destroying your own community, you also have from Black Mirror the episode of White Bear. This explores mob justice and moral culpability through that dystopian lens. So much more still of that like community center focus, but still the idea of greed and protection and what will you do. So you also have the escapism side of things with the hitchhiker, the obsolete man in regular Twilight Zone, of the fear of the unknown causes us to kind of like become unhuman, dehumanizes us. And for Playtest, my all-time favorite TV show episode, you also have an episode called Striking Vipers. These are two video game specific episodes of Black Mirror, but they both explore the idea of video games being a means of escape. So this is where that escapism comes in. It's also the idea of like, when you're in this other realm, are you completely untouchable? Are you completely unaccountable for any choices and actions that you take in this other simulation? And it goes back into almost simulation theory, because it's like, if I can do anything in there without any guilt or worry about who I am and what I'm doing because it doesn't matter, then if we are living in a simulation, who cares? Do whatever you want, it doesn't matter. So it's an interesting conversation on the reflection of escapism versus reality versus simulation versus much bigger picture. So I think Playtest specifically has a really, really great capture of a solid ending, a great twist ending. Striking Vipers is a little bit more wholesome in a way, but not nearly as dreadful. Playtest is just, I mean, I have nothing bad to say about Playtest. I could go on for a very long time, so I'm going to stop. But I do think that where Black Mirror and Twilight Zone intersect, this is some of our golden eggs of TV shows and of content, because they make such great points and it's very compelling, it's very believable, but at the same time, the Twilight Zone and Black Mirror make you think, and they do subconsciously make you scared, even if it's not overtly horror or overtly scary. They're all still focused on this idea of the unknown, and none of us know what is coming next. So if we're all in this together, do we have each other's backs, or are we all kind of screwed? And I think there's more fear in that than there is in what is actually happening or coming, because Can we trust the people who are around us? Can we trust the people who are in charge? The reason why we're seeing so many problems with mental illness and problems like that is because there's no real good leadership left. I'm not taking any strikes on politics or anything like that, but it's the idea of like we need, as a society, as humans, a sense of direction, I think. And the reason why, also again, in my opinion, horror is becoming a lot more prevalent in the more modern times is because people are really more scared than they ever have before. You have times where the Twilight Zone was originally created where, well, what's the answer? Well, we'll go to war. Now that's not really the answer, and people are starting to ask more questions, and you're not just following the rules anymore. So there's a lot more liberation, but there's no guardrails around this very windy rainbow road. So people are scared. So I think we're going to need to see a lot more TV shows that give us that simulation style so that we can explore it before the world continues going on and on and on. So that's my 2 cents. But in the meantime, before we're waiting for new things, these episodes can work. I've talked multiple times before about using horror as a means of like immersion therapy, like really feel the empathy of those characters and get your feelings out. Twilight Zone works the same way, just in little snippets. Black Mirror works the same way, just in little snippets. So if you can find an episode or a story or a character that is compelling enough for you to connect with them, ride that train, because you will learn so much about yourself just by watching these people and what they do. And if you disagree, don't go in there, oh, why would they do that? I've been rooting for them this whole time. How can you then put that into your own life? I've been rooting for myself this whole time, and now I'm making choices that are against where I would be cheering for me in a movie. Don't do that. So that's enough of that. I'll stop my rambling. I could talk about Twilight Zone and all of this stuff for a very long time, but I think there is a level of responsibility of like using these episodes almost as lessons of history at this point. And anytime that there's anxiety about what's next or what's coming or what's new, it doesn't hurt to revisit. So I gave you my list of some of my favorites as well as the ties to Black Mirror, but I do think that the Twilight Zone is really a once-in-a-lifetime super special TV show. And again, my prediction is I think we're going to see a lot more like it. So I'm looking forward to it, but I'm also incredibly appreciative that we have the entire compendium to work with. So if you like the Twilight Zone or if you have any other favorite episodes, let me know. I'm always watching it. I'm always looking for new ones. So thank you as always for listening, for sticking with this, and we will see you next week.